of our three-part live stream, our friendly neighborhood Q&As every Friday and Saturday night, and then we finish it off with a little Sunday afternoon history, compliments of the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where I will be discussing different historical topics at different times for different people about different places, different things, different events, and different personalities throughout history, and that is what we do with the live stream lectures every Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Join me then, and that is where I will be discussing topics usually suggested by those in the Friendly Neighborhood History community. And we are in our brand new studio. We still don't have Wi-Fi, so the reception might be shoddy. Hopefully it's not as bad as yesterday. But this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you quality history, entertainment, and content about social studies, geography, geopolitics, both past and present, social sciences, and the humanities, usually in short form and long videos. And we also do live stream lectures on Sunday afternoons, and our Q&As every Friday and Saturday night. Ask anything about history and social studies and things like that. And we are in the process of moving, kind of a forced relocation. I've been talking about a lot on the channel, but we will be in this position for the next foreseeable future, and I'm going to be getting equipment, so the next time you see me in live stream lectures, I will be in a much more suitable position with lighting and my microphone's back and all of that good stuff. So unfortunately we lost those things, so we can't get them back, but I'm going to be back to my normal lighting and microphone come Friday, which was really difficult because we had just gotten this new equipment and it was expanding the channel as we are seeking to do in the next hour or so. We are just over at Legion, over 6,000 friendly neighborhood historians, people who like and subscribe and join the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, and enjoy the content we bring, the history we talk about, all of the things that we discuss. And that is what the Friendly Neighborhood History channel is all about. So if you like learning about history, you're in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing, following the social media handles, and also joining me on Patreon, where I have more exclusive content for the Friendly Neighborhood historians and the best friend historians there. And as well, we also have a Substack where you can catch my latest articles. Read my last two about the wildfires affecting Southern California and its impact on the culture and society, and its historical parallels and common themes, because as a historian, my job is to see the themes within history and the different things that affect from the past that affect the present and will affect the future. And that's what we're here to do, and that's what we do in our live stream Q&As, and that's what we do in our live stream lectures. So today I'm going to be talking about the history of the Taíno natives. This is upon request from some friendly neighborhood historians who like and subscribe. Usually will suggest topics for the live stream lecture, and then I will happily oblige. So we are discussing the Taíno natives tribe that Columbus first encountered when he first got to the Americas in the 1490s. And we are also going to be looking at the we're also going to be discussing the history of early Christianity, and especially in the first century. I've done a live stream lecture on Christianity, so check that out if you're interested in that and its spread. But I'm also going to be talking about just Christianity in the first century, what its beliefs were, and how it evolved and everything. So basically, thank you for joining us and everything. If you like learning about history and societies, and definitely the Portuguese are part of that, you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. Basically, okay, Ben Dover, is this slow enough for you? Is that better? I hope that's better. I appreciate your support. I don't make people a moderator right away. I've got wonderful moderators such as Simon the Bunny and Rodolfo. And shout out to my Patreonies, Henry Wright and Ballet Peace, History Bunny, and some of the others there, Contreras MA. I really appreciate you guys supporting me there. So if you're watching this, best of luck to you, and hope you are well. So anyways, but Ismael, I'm glad you're here. I hope you love learning about history and social studies, because that's what we're going to be talking about. And maybe after some time seeing you more and more, we frequent appearances and all of that, we tend to have people become moderators. It's not impossible to become a moderator, but it's I've got four wonderful moderators who hold down the fort really well for me, and so I'm usually good on that, but I can always use more. So thank you so much. I'm not going to just pile on moderators, but thank you. Yeah, you have been here a year. We haven't been around a year, so you were here with another channel. We started in February of 2023, kind of on a whim, just talking about history and social studies and important things like that. And since then, we have been growing and working on different historical topics and issues, and short form content, lots of that. And finally, in the summer, giving back and answering people's questions. a weekend. We had Saturdays and Sundays, and then I decided that all the topics I wanted to discuss in a live stream lecture could easily be done or in a Q&A. We couldn't get to it. It could easily be done if I added a live stream lecture. So we added the live stream lecture, and that's where we are now. So hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. You are with the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we discuss history in a friendly neighborhood way. And we usually do this every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is our live stream lecture. So today's show, Spartacus, I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you're looking forward to it. It's going to be about the Taíno native tribe and early Christianity, and I will start with early Christianity because that actually comes first, obviously, in the historical lexicon. Add early European exploration of Americas all the way to the natives and include the transatlantic slave trade and wars to expand America. Well, yeah, that's a great topic. In fact, that would be a great topic for next weekend. Next weekend, I'm doing a couple of live stream lectures as a special for MLK Day, and one of them is going to be about Oliver Cromwell and the English Civil War, which is a pre-requested topic from another user. And then on Monday, I'm going to be doing a special, shorter live stream lecture about the history, impact, and legacy of Martin Luther King, the great Dr. King. Anyways, thanks to Riff, who also claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. We've been having internet connection. On 5G to get me through because I'm up in the mountains and that's not always the best, but thank you for all of those who are caring and have shown a lot of support during this very difficult time. I really appreciate it, by the way, trying to redirect us towards the history because this is what I need to do to keep going. What is the context of early Christianity? Well, Christianity at its beginning and its inception is an offset of the Jewish religion. Obviously, in the 1st century BC, the Jewish people had achieved some level of autonomy from the Greeks who had been the empire before them, and that empire was eventually conquered by the Romans. And when the Roman Empire conquered them, they allowed them to continue their own religious practices and customs, realize, as the Romans did everywhere, they basically allowed people to continue kind of in their own vein as long as they were doing what was necessary and needed to be proper Romans. And the Jews were able to worship at their temple, but they felt the heavy yoke of Roman imperialism, Roman oppression, Roman taxes, and the Jews were extremely rebellious. Excuse me for a second as I take you on a quick tour of not just my studio, but my new dwellings, as I'm just checking on something really fast. But basically, the Romans were extraordinarily oppressive. Okay, everything's good. Extraordinarily oppressive and very, very unkind to the Jewish people. They let them do what they wanted and keep their culture and everything, but it was not much more than that. There was a lot of imperialism and a lot of demands, especially for money and power, and the Jews were constantly rebellious against this. They didn't want to be ruled over by a polytheistic Gentile people, and so there was constant feelings of revolt. There were constant people who believed that they had a religious calling from God to overthrow the Roman government, and they were known as the Zealots. They were a common group that emerged in the 1st century BC as the Romans took over. Basically, Pompey the Great, the Roman commander, conquered Judea and gave it into the hands of a good friend of his who was only half Jewish, a man named Herod, and Herod became basically the ruler. The Romans let him rule kind of semi-autonomously over that region for the rest of his life. He is known as Herod the Great. He rebuilt the temple. He is also featured in the biblical stories of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. But basically, the point... anyways, but now sorry, getting distracted by the chat. What I was saying is that sorry about that. The Romans basically oppressed the Jews and forced them to do what they wanted. The Jews didn't want to do this, but Herod was allowed to rule over them kind of in a semi-autonomous way, as kind of being the middleman between the Romans and the Jews, but continual rebellions by the Jews, by Jewish groups like the Zealots, who didn't want to be ruled over by polytheistic Gentiles, led to continual issues and tensions between them around the time of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Eventually, Herod had allied himself with Pompey and then later with Mark Antony. Pompey was defeated by Julius Caesar, who was and Caesar's nephew Octavian, along with Antony, united to kill the senators who had stabbed Caesar to death. And eventually Antony and Octavian, now better known to history as Augustus Caesar, turned on each other and they had a civil war, and Mark Antony lost. So Herod was on the losing side of multiple civil wars issues, and he was worried that Octavian would not let him maintain his land, but Octavian basically allowed him to rule over the Jewish people as an intermediary between them and the Romans, and Herod was an excellent builder, and he was able to administrate the land pretty well, but the pressure of the Romans and Roman legionaries living in Judea really frustrated the people of Judea. That was the name of the Roman province for the area. And they, you got your shout out, mister. So the, thank you, Underboss. I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you to do. Thank you for supporting the channel. And Rodolfo is here, my wonderful moderator. Make sure to show Rodolfo some love. Anyways, Rodolfo, the social media handles and Patreon are in the description of the channel on YouTube. If you want to paste them in the chat, we can have everybody see them and hopefully follow me there. Anyways, now that we've gotten that housekeeping out of the way, the Romans continue to oppress the Jews and make it life very hard for them in Judea. And there are different Jewish groups that believe they are in this position for different reasons. There are the Zealots, who I already mentioned, who are resisting Roman rule and want to cause a rebellion, and they will be successful in fomenting rebellion twice with the Jewish revolt in 66 BC, or 80, our Kakba revolt in the early 130s, and after banished them from the land and renamed Judea. There's a group called the Essenes, who have become way too impure in their practices and have abandoned God, and they live in desert-like communal compounds, and they actually write a group of texts about the Old Testament called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they'd actually existed for centuries before them, but they became more intense during the time of the New Testament when Jesus was alive. It's possible that John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, who supposedly baptized him in the Jordan River, may have been part of the Essenes community. They usually lived out in the desert, and they were ascetics who basically gave up any sort of belongings or wealth or privilege and basically lived difficult lives. Sometimes they would even torture themselves, flagellation and things like that, in order to get closer to God. And they basically, through minimalism, sought to achieve God's higher calling for their lives. Then there were the Pharisees, who were the most religious group of priests and religious leaders in the temple, and these people basically believed that God had set out laws, and the Jews had struggled and suffered as a people because they had failed to follow these laws, and because of that, they were not. It was their job to follow every single one of the laws in the commandments and the commentaries on those commandments, which will eventually later on become compiled into the Talmud, at least one of the Talmuds. There are several Talmuds. And it was their job, since God had taken them out of the land and brought them back, that the only way they could ever free themselves of imperial powers, and the only way they could ever have their own land back again, like they had in the times of King David in the Old Testament, was if they actually became the pure people of God that he wanted them to be, and therefore they had to follow the laws perfectly and very strictly. And the fourth group was the most politically powerful and the closest to the Romans, who the temple high priests and many of the people with political power had. They had the ear of Herod, and they had the ear of the Romans, and they were known as the Sadducees. And the Sadducees basically believed that only the 5 books of Moses from the Hebrew Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, supposedly written by Moses, who freed the Jews from captivity in the Exodus, only those are necessary. Only those things were necessary to follow, and they had a much more loose interpretation of understanding the commandments and the Hebrew Bible, and they were much more interested in practical political decisions living in their day and age, and the current cultural and political climate of being subjects of the Roman Empire through this intermediary known as the Herodian dynasty, because Herod not only ruled, but later his son Archelaus and Antipas would rule over certain sections of the land of Judea. And I'm calling it Judea and not Israel because that's what the Romans called it. That was the name of the Roman province. So in this context of different Jewish groups that all have different religious convictions, the Zealots believing that God had assigned them the job of retaking the land violently, the Essenes, who believed that God had assigned them to the desert in order to live better lives, and they were being punished by God and that they needed to punish themselves, and the Pharisees, who believed they were being punished by God, but their job was to be absolutely perfect Jews, and if they could be absolutely perfect Jews who followed all of the laws, then God would deliver them. And the Sadducees, who believed in being the most practical and politically savvy and powerful they could in order to gain some sort of autonomy and not to upset the Romans at any time. Basically, these people were the religious and spiritual authorities, and almost like the political parties, at least religious political parties of the time of Jesus of Nazareth. So Jesus of Nazareth, of course, we just celebrated, many people throughout the world celebrated advertently or inadvertently his birthday with Christmas. Orthodox Christmas was on January 7th, so the Christmas festivities have ceased. But basically it is the celebration of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. in case you didn't know. And I'm going to refer to him as Jesus of Nazareth and not Jesus Christ for one simple reason. Jesus Christ, I almost always refer to him as Jesus of Nazareth, except when I'm talking about Christianity, because, of course, they are Christ followers. Jesus Christ, Christ is the Greek word for the Hebrew word Mashiach, which is Messiah or deliverer or savior. And so to refer to Jesus Christ, Christ is not his last name, Christ is a title referring to him as the Messiah in Christian circles. But Jesus of Nazareth is the historical term because he was from the town of Nazareth. He was of a lineage of he was of a tribe of Judah. Supposedly, at least his followers claimed, of a line of King David, meaning he was the real heir to the Jewish throne. And that was how they legitimized and understood his messiahship, as that he would shepherd the people of Israel, as it says in the New Testament, and that he would guide them into freedom and what Jesus of Nazareth was supposed to be. And he claimed to the age of 30. He was one of the most open-minded and liberal rabbis in the sense that he women to be around him in close proximity, according to the gospel narratives. And he also would generally bend the laws or reapply the laws that were so stridently followed by the Pharisees in order to preach more his own tenets, which were more past perform miracles. Now, I'm getting most of this from the Gospels, but there are historians such as Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian who wrote for the Romans in the 1st century, and Tacitus, a Roman historian, who do testify that there was a man called Jesus of Nazareth who supposedly performed miracles, was crucified, and all of that stuff. There was a Jesus of Nazareth. He did exist. I don't believe that mythicism has any historical backing whatsoever. Just because Jesus of Nazareth exists doesn't make him God, doesn't make him Messiah, doesn't make him all these sorts of things. It's not a win for Christians that Jesus happened to exist. Jews, Muslims, and Hindus all believe that Jesus exists, and many non-religious people believe that he existed and are perfectly fine with many of his teachings, but are not fine with calling him God. Same with Jews and Muslims, for instance. So, Jesus was a rabbi and a leader in what I was going to say is Jesus was a rabbi and a leader in the in that political and religious climate and structure of the time, and basically taught a more loose interpretation or reinterpretation of the Jewish law, which constantly put him and his followers at odds with the Pharisees and their followers. And so for about 3 years, according to the gospel narratives, Jesus lived and performed his ministry. He supposedly performed miracles and all of this. The Gospels themselves are a series of biographies written by people who either knew him or knew of him or knew people who were close to him. There are 4 major ones that were accepted into the New Testament, although other Gospels written much later were also tell of his life and adventures, like the Gospel of Thomas or Judas, although the Christian church later condemned these as heretical and inaccurate representations of the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the accepted 4 ones. I'm sure you know about that. I'm not trying to talk down to anyone, by the way. I'm not assuming you don't know about this. I'm giving you the historical context in which this happened, and as objective as possible, a perspective from a historian. Objectivity is one of the biggest cornerstones of my historical analysis. So, Jesus went about the gospel narratives. I'm not saying that they're all true and everything about them is right. What I am saying is that based on on how histories were written and life and things were written at that time, there was, in all likelihood, basically Jesus of Nazareth. The Gospels contextually are a biography and are a historical retelling of the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Yes, they include a lot of mythical, strange, and miraculous occurrences and events. However, those are not any different than many of the histories and biographies written at the time, where the gods interfered to save the Greeks during the Peloponnesian War in Thucydides. And Thucydides' writings are accepted as a history. We know that they're not necessarily historical, but the record of the New Testament writings, there's a lot of evidence that they were. We have the earliest records. We have the earliest copies of the writings of the New Testament from only a few decades after the books were supposedly written by the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so there's reason to believe, and that compiled with the vast amount of evidence for the New Testament, and also the way histories and biographies were written at those time, you can say that they are generally, especially for that context in time, reliable histories. Now, if anyone wrote a gospel account today, they would know that it was a religious text and not an actual biblical one. or not a historical one. I'm not saying that the Gospels are history today. I'm not saying everything about every single thing in them is true. I am saying, as a historian, these facts are true. They are parallel to the other histories of other important figures and historical events, and they are also extraordinarily religiously significant to the Christian people. And at the same time, there is a lot of textual evidence for written in a particular time period and evidence of their predilection and what's the word, proliferation during the first couple centuries. Last New Testament books were supposed first century. It's possible that the Gospels were finished, so there's a lot of evidence there. So yes, you are right, Greg. Copies that are still extant are from them. That doesn't mean there weren't copies that before that were destroyed, but when you compare it to other source materials for Plato or Thucydides, who I mentioned before, or any other historical figure, there, especially from the ancient world, where there is a closeness in proximity between the writings of the New Testament and when they were proliferated and extant copies of them, even during the time of the persecution by the Romans, which was common for the early Christian church. So when you take that all into account, it's actually pretty impressive. And you get the first copies attributed compared to copies attributed to the Gospels from only a few decades after the earliest fragments and parts and whole books actually come from only a few decades or a couple of centuries after the actual events written and depicted. But that's more recent and closer to the actual events than a copy of Plato, for instance, which came out which the textual evidence of ancient texts is centuries old, took centuries to produce compared to the gospel narratives, which probably took decades in fragments and centuries in whole. So, Gregory, you are absolutely correct about that. So I'm not saying anything particularly. I am saying, based off of all of that, as a historian, I have to understand they are historical documents of that time period, and there is nothing wrong with saying that. And I apologize to everyone for the shoddy internet and everything. I hope you can all hear me okay and everything. I'm doing my absolute best. I've been forced into relocation, some difficult occurrences in my life, and I know I've gotten a lot of support, but I'm just letting you all know, if you're just joining us, why there's a lag, why normally there isn't, why there's lighting issues when there normally isn't, and things like that. So thank you very much for joining us on the Sunday afternoon and spending your Sunday afternoon learning about the early history of the Christian church. So, Jesus of Nazareth, after 3 years, makes several comments that are extremely specious and suspect to the Jewish leaders. Among them, he claims to be the Messiah, which is not uncommon. There are many Jewish rabbis who have claimed to be the Messiah, but he also claims that this Messiah is God's son and that he is God. Now, the Romans believed that Julius Caesar was a god and that Octavian, who became the Emperor Augustus in 31 BC and allowed Herod to rule over the Jewish people, that the Roman emperor was a god. So Augustus was the son of God, and Julius Caesar was God, and Augustus was the son of God, and then Augustus was made into a god after he died, and a new emperor, Tiberius, took over the empire, and so Tiberius was now the son of God, and he was the emperor during the ministry of Jesus. So the educated people and those who were not Jews, or those who were Hellenized Jews, who were familiar with Roman culture and religion, were very well aware that the Roman emperor was supposed to be the son of God, and that the Roman emperor before him was God. Just as Julius Caesar had been a god and Augustus had been his son and supposedly the son of God, Augustus was now a god and Tiberius was the son of God. So when Jesus claims to be God, he is claiming to be God in their minds, and there is huge anger at this from the religious community, who believes that God cannot appear in human form and that the Messiah is not necessarily God. This is a whole reinterpretation of their religious understanding, especially for the Pharisees, who are very strict in their understanding of the Old Testament. The claim of being God, of being divine, or of divine origin, and the idea of a Messiah who is not a conqueror, who would deliver them from the oppression of the Romans, but more of a pacifist who was preaching love and tolerance, and kindness and forgiveness of debts and things like this, frightened and upset many of the different religious communities. You can tell why the Zealots would not be particularly happy about Jesus. You could tell why the Sadducees and the Pharisees Jesus, by claiming to be a god, threatened the entire religious structure and safety of of Judea from the Romans, who didn't care if somebody claimed to be God, but they did care about their gods, especially Caesar being God. So there's tension with the Sadducees. The Pharisees don't believe the Messiah is divine and that God can appear in human form necessarily, or does appear in human form. That creates more tension. And then you have zealots who want a political revolution, and a lot of the people believe that the Messiah will be a man who brings about political revolution for Israel. Far more of a pacifist than he advocates, and so there's a lot of question marks surrounding Jesus, and there's a lot of tension and frustration between his followers and his teachings and those of the Pharisees and their followers and the other religious groups in Israel at the time, or in Judea. So what happened? Supposedly, after 3 years in ministry, that's based on his celebration of the different Jewish festivals, such as Passover. Jesus celebrated Hanukkah and things like this. Jesus is eventually brought up on charges of treason against Caesar and also for blasphemy. Instead of stoning him, the Jews want to make him an example, so they ask the Romans, who are in charge of the province, to execute him for crucifixion, which is a death originally formulated by the Assyrians and the Persians, but eventually perfected by the Romans, where someone is hung on a stake and basically suffocated to death because they have to push up to breathe, and when they run out of strength to do that, they starve to death, but they asphyxiate themselves. But at the same time, it's also to put someone on display for what a criminal and horrible person they are, and to obviously mock them. It's a way to terrorize anyone who would rebel, and it is a way to stop dissension. And the Romans have become quite good at this. And Jesus is obviously the most famous example of crucifixion. And the Romans, for them, they're putting down a rebel, and for the Jews, the Jewish leaders, they're getting rid of a religious issue. Now, throughout the history between Judaism and Christianity, especially as Christianity gained more power in the Western world, especially, there is the idea that the Jews killed Jesus. This is not true. Several Jewish leaders who had, and I did a historical myths video on this. I do historical myths from time to time. Basically, the several Jewish leaders, fearing Jesus' teachings, would invoke a riot and a revolution and destabilize the entire political and religious in Judea at the time. Basically, demanded a man named Pontius Pilate basically let him die or execute him. And so they put him on trial. They found him guilty of crucifixion. Now, Jesus is crucified and he dies. That is also extremely well historically documented. This has nothing to do with dying for sins. This has nothing to do with him being divine. It is extremely well documented that Jesus lived, and it's almost as well documented that Jesus was executed by the Romans. So the Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Elder, and there are tons of sources that testify to Jesus existing and Jesus being killed. Jesus was not invented, like some histories are now saying, by the Romans in order to control the people. That doesn't make any sense. The Roman Empire brutally persecuted the Christian church for centuries, and was only commandeered by the Christian church in the form of Roman Catholicism after the Christians basically outpaced them with birth rates in the early 4th century. Sand is one of the people on the chat. So anyways, but basically, what am I saying? So Jesus is executed by the Romans, and is... Okay, our internet went out again. Okay, sorry about that. And Jesus is executed by the Romans, and then 3 days later, supposedly, according to the Gospels and his followers, and this is the whole basis of the Christian religion, he is risen from the dead. He could have been just a failed Jewish rabbi who called himself the Messiah, and who the Jews would have respect for and honor. And he is honored and respected by the Jews. He is not read by the Jews, though, because of his claims of divinity, and also because of the whole issue of the resurrection. Supposedly, as he had supposedly also prophesied, Jesus rose from the dead 3 days after he was killed. This became the defining feature of Christianity and became the distinctive mark between it and Judaism, along with the divinity of Christ. So the early Christian community considered themselves to be the extension of Jews. They consider themselves to be Jews, and if you read the book of Acts, which is the 5th book of the New Testament, which tells the story of the early Christians, they were extraordinarily, I appreciate you asking, Sam, because it's good to tell people about other sources beyond just the Gospels. Is evidence for this stuff outside of the Gospels, and it doesn't mean the whole story is true, but it does add historical credibility to what I'm saying. So I'm happy about it. But basically, the followers of Jesus, they call themselves the followers of the way, and eventually they became known as Christians or imitations of Christ. The followers of the New Testament is the Old Testament supposedly, which becomes Israel. Supposedly, Jesus of Nazareth is the second Joshua, the fulfillment of Joshua, and he is the new Messiah, and he is the Messiah who conquers through love and not through hate. And this is the message of the early Christians as they distinguish themselves from the Jews, but also continue to pray and worship at the Jewish temple and continue to proliferate Jewish ideas and teachings. And they continue these, but add on top of it the teachings and practices of Jesus, and they're also continuing the. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. They're also continuing to see themselves as Jews and as an extension of Jews. So it's a cult or a group within Judaism that believes this man is their Messiah. And the Jewish leaders have very little tolerance for some of these men, like Peter and Paul, who is a Jewish leader who eventually converts to Christianity. And these men are constantly under threat of persecution, first from the Jews, and then from Romans, as they branch out, leaving the area of Palestine and eventually spreading into the rest of the Middle East, and into Turkey, Anatolia, and then into the Roman Empire, into Greece, which is extremely important for the ministry of a man named Paul. The Apostle Paul, as he is known, is extraordinarily hell-bent on spreading the gospel throughout the Roman Empire using the lingua franca of Greek, the common language of Greek, to be able to spread it more quickly through the Roman Empire, using the infrastructure the Romans built, their roads and their road system, for instance, and their bridge system and all of that great stuff, to be able to spread it more quickly. So because Greek is the common language of the world at the time of Jesus of Nazareth, despite the fact that he was a Jewish rabbi who spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, probably, well, Jesus probably as a rabbi had the ability to read and write, so he could probably write in Hebrew, and would speak Hebrew, but also could speak Aramaic, which was the common tongue of the Semitic peoples of southwestern Asia at that time. Franca was Greek, and so the Greek language was paramount for writing down the accounts of Jesus in the Gospels and for writing the Christian exhortations and messages, the story of the church in the book of Acts, and the letters of the different church leaders of the church, like Paul, Peter, and James, and men like that. And these men spread and promulgate the Christian faith throughout the Roman Empire throughout the second half of the first century. And the biggest challenge to them comes from the Roman Emperor Nero, who is hell-bent on persecuting the Christian church as much as he possibly can, blaming them for a fire which they did not, that he may have started himself, supposedly, in about 66 AD. At the same time, the Jewish temple is destroyed by a man named Titus, who is the son of the Roman general Vespasian, who takes a legion of forces and basically overthrows Nero and his successors and becomes the Roman emperor Vespasian in 69 AD. At the same time, the temple is destroyed, and the center of Jewish life and culture and, of course, religion, where sacrifices had been offered for centuries, where prayers were offered daily by both Jews and Christians at that point, was no longer extant. This supposedly fulfilled prophecy spoken by Jesus, and his followers then decide to move on from worshiping at the temple, and from there the two religions continue to start to separate, and their separation is now spatial as well as theological. Yeah, I thank you for that. I don't do a script because I find this to be more organic, and I enjoy doing that. And I'm not usually pausing and halting as much because I'm obviously in a new environment and figuring things out and working on stuff like that. So, but yeah, thank you so much. Let me see here. And I think most of what I'm saying is factually provable. So the Christian message spreads throughout the Roman Empire in the second half of the first century, and with Nero and afterwards, there's going to be frequent persecutions of the Christian church throughout the next few centuries until a man named Constantine, supposedly using a Christian symbol, but also realizing the sign of his times and realizing how Christianity has grown in influence and power, basically uses political Christianity to help legitimize his takeover of the Roman Empire in the early 4th century and legalizes the religion. Following its worst persecution to date under a man named Diocletian, Constantine legalizes the Christian community and becomes an ally of the church, and with his own religious convictions, thoroughly pagan. Eventually, he embraces well, supposedly. But a quick history. I didn't want to get into but that's a quick history of the Christian church. The book of Acts, perhaps the oldest and most established of Jesus's disciples. Jesus had many followers, but he had a special group of people who become known as the 12 apostles, and among them is their leader, Peter. And this is the basis for Roman Catholicism, believing that Peter, who according to church tradition, went to Rome and became the leader of the church, or the bishop. This is the Roman Catholic understanding that Peter was the first pope, and this is where the papacy comes from. That's their argument, at least. Same time, I'm blanking out again. The internet's bad. Peter, who has gone the leader of Rome when the persecutions break out, he initially flees, but then decides, according to church tradition, to return to the city, and is supposedly crucified upside down. And supposedly many of the closest inner circle of Jesus, the 12 apostles, were killed in horrible ways in persecution, usually by the Roman Empire, with the most powerful and extensive land force in the world at the time. So basically, that is the justification for Peter being the first pope, but believing that he wasn't good enough, and he didn't deserve. Okay, someone was trying to call me. I don't know why. But anyways, but basically the religious dogmas of the different churches. The religious dogmas of the different churches are promulgated on traditions and historical ideas that became popular in their religion. So the Christians have all of these stories about Peter and Paul. Those are part of their traditions that help undergird their foundations and the validity of their religious beliefs. A good argument that Christians tend to use apologetically and philosophically for their position being correct, and for Jesus being the Messiah and being God, and for rising from the dead, is that why would all of the apostles die, and why would the church be so heavily persecuted? People don't die for a lie, so obviously they're not lying, which seems like a jump in logic to me, but that's just my opinion. But basically, that is where I get, that is a basic quick survey of the early Christian church in the first century, heavily, very close to Judaism, coming from a Jewish source, coming from a Jewish rabbi who believed he was God's messenger to save the world, but not through hate, but instead of through hate, through love, killed by the political authorities who were influenced by some religious leaders who wanted him out of the way. His followers spread throughout not just through the Judean region, but eventually agreed to preach to the Gentiles and spread throughout the entire Gentile world, making Christianity a religion of the Gentiles, while Judaism, of course, remained mainly a religion of the Jews. I mean, ipso facto, it's Judaism. And and from that ran into the Roman Empire, which the infrastructure, political stability, peace, and power of the Roman Empire, known as the Pax Romana, during the first century AD, allowed the Christian church and its message to spread very quickly. Eventually, the Roman Emperor Nero persecuted the church heavily, using them as a scapegoat for his own ambitions and designs and desires, and perhaps his own activities. And that eventually leads to the Christian church growing, surprisingly, despite the persecution, but having to be underground, using secret symbols like the fish, the ichthus, which is why the fish symbol is the Christian symbol, to help identify each other. And they will be persecuted for the next few centuries as their religious leaders, including the apostles who were closest to Jesus during his lifetime ministry, are killed by the state. And so Christianity will always be at odds, at least for the next few centuries, just like Judaism, with the empire that is overseeing the world, and that is the Romans. But the peace and stability of the Roman Empire and the proliferation and promulgation of the Christian doctrines are easy because the lingua franca is Greece, and the Roman Empire protects its people. So there's a lot going, except for the Christians that they killed. So I'm not making a religious statement or anything. Somebody asked for the history of Christianity. I'm not making a religious statement or anything. Somebody asked for the history of Christianity, or at least early Christianity, and I've talked about early Christianity to Constantine. I just wanted to give a snapshot of the context of Christianity, the development of Jesus of Nazareth and his teachings, and the development of the Christian church, which will later codify these into the doctrines and creeds. By the way, most of the New Testament is written in the first century, but it is not seen as authoritative or recognized as the definitive text until the fourth century by the church. And of course, the Catholic, Orthodox, Coptic churches all claim that Jesus started them. Protestant churches are much less likely to say that. So an evangelical Christian church, which is common here in the United States, will not say Jesus started them, but they broke off from other Protestants who probably broke off from Catholicism, and that goes back to Jesus. So directly or indirectly, Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah and their God, this Jewish rabbi who supposedly claimed these things about himself. So basically, that's a I'd be fine with having Underboss as my moderator. He does such a great job for the channel. I really appreciate it. But basically, that is how that is a quick history and summary of the early Christian church. Hopefully, as objective as possible. I'm trying to be as fair as possible. And yes, Selena, you are right. The Pax Romana allowed the spread. So if okay, we're breaking up again. Selena's right. The Pax Romana allowed the church to spread. So if you liked what I talked about and you felt I did a good job of handling all of that, like and subscribe. And even if you don't disagree, I didn't really offer an opinion, trying to offer as much factual information as possible. If you want to hear my opinions, ask, join our live streams and our Q&A. So Friday evenings, and feel free to come and ask us anything you'd like. Thank you for the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. History to you in a friendly neighborhood manner. Take a little bit less time. My phone's down to 6%, so I'm kind of burning the candle at both ends here. But we don't have as much time, and I've gone into this and talked about it a lot in detail previously. I can't do justice to talking about an entire Native American tribe just in 15 minutes. Some justice if I'm talking about one specific incident and one group that's well known for something, and that is the Taíno tribe encountered by Christopher Columbus. So, a common misconception, regardless of whether you think the Vikings got to the Americas before or after Columbus or not, they did. But a common misconception surrounding the founding of the Americas by Columbus is that Columbus landed in what is now the United States. Columbus never landed in the United States. He didn't even land in Mexico. He landed, I believe, in the country. He landed in the country. Okay. And I'm sorry about that, and all of the I've been forced to relocate. I'm in a new space doing new things, and because of that, I don't have Wi-Fi currently, and that is what's making it difficult to have conversations. Basically, that's why I'm praying and everything. So usually we're not like that. Next weekend, I promise we won't be like that. We'll do everything we can to fix that. Hopefully you guys can hear me now, and I'm coming in clear and everything. But as I was talking about, Columbus did not technically land in the United States. And only on his fourth voyage did he land in the country that bears his name, Columbia. So Columbia is obviously named after Christopher Columbus. In fact, Ben Franklin wanted to rename the United States Columbia after they got their independence from the British. Fun fact there. So there's more here. So what else? So Columbus, if he is indeed the first European to get to the New World before, of course, the Vikings, assuming the Vikings are not there, he never landed in the United States or Canada or Mexico. So North America technically is strange to Columbus. Now, he did sail around the coast of these areas, around the coast of Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula and areas like this, but he never actually landed in these areas. So there is also Columbus in his first voyage landed in the Bahamas, and the first tribe that he encountered, and then he went to Cuba. He later landed in the Virgin Islands, and he later landed in the island of Hispaniola, which was named Haiti, which is what the name given by the Spanish to the Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which was divided when the French took Haiti and the Spanish kept the Dominican Republic. But Columbus landed in the Bahamas, and it was in the Bahamas that he encountered the Taíno tribe. And the Taíno tribe, who he thought were ripe for the plucking, both as possible Christian, as a Christian and a thoroughly Europeanized, Christianized Europe, Columbus believed that God had sent him to the New World and was keeping him safe, and he dedicated his entire voyage to the Virgin Mary because of his strong Catholic beliefs. Columbus believed that God had sent him to the New World to achieve new and amazing things for Spain, but also for the kingdom of God, and he believed that his job was to evangelize the natives. Now, it is probably not likely that Columbus called the natives Indians because he believed he was in India. That is actually, he did believe he was in India, but he didn't call Indians Indians back then. They called them Hindustanis. Hindustan was the name of the land anyways at the time of the Indian subcontinent. So Columbus probably did believe he was in India, but called the people un gente indios, Indian, indigenous. It's where we get all those words from, but a people in God is what he called them, un gente un dios, and that is what he thought of the Taíno tribe. He also believed that they were ripe for the plucking for the Christian message, and that he finally had a missionary field that he could work with, and that he could impress upon them Christian values, and that by impressing upon them Christian values, it would make it easier for them to trade and be colonized, and also it would make them more civilized, and they would stop running around half naked and all of that stuff. Columbus believed that in order to civilize these native peoples, he needed to bring them Christian beliefs. He also believed that they would be ripe for the plucking for enslavement and for colonization and subjugation, and that the lands that he was finding would have incredible amounts of resources that he could bring back to enrich in Spain. And so it is true that Columbus did look at the natives as both a mission field to be civilizing and to be brought to Christianity and to be made allies, or, if not, to be enslaved and subjugated. And Columbus did not, at times, hesitated with slavery and was not sure about slavery. Very few people back then were running around saying slavery was wrong and should not happen. Slavery was a common thing. The Europeans revolutionized slavery because of the technology that allowed them to go around the globe, like the Carax and the use of the astrolabe and things like that. So the truth of the matter is that slavery was common in that area of the world. The natives were enslaving each other. The Spanish had been enslaving each other. Slavery of other Europeans by Europeans was not common anymore because serfdom had replaced it. But now even serfdom was going the way of the dodo bird. Indentured servitude was more common, where someone would work off a debt, or basically sell themselves for labor for years without payment in order to pay off a debt or to receive something. Indentured servants were brought to the Americas as a way to pay for immigration and passage. They would sell themselves into slavery, basically, for several years at a time. But so serfdom and indentured servitude had replaced slavery in the minds of the Europeans, but that doesn't mean they believe that these non-Christian people who they believed were uncivilized were not competent slaves. They needed people to work to get the silver and the gold that they were expecting to find. Columbus was the first one to encounter this, which would create powerful things such as tobacco, leaves, snuff, things like that. Cotton, obviously good for textile industry. Those things would later become the basis for slavery throughout the New World, first of the natives and later of the Africans. So the truth of the matter is that so Columbus, encountering these natives, saw them as a potential mission field, but also thought that they could be exploited, and he did indeed exploit them over time by taking their land. Now, the Taíno tribe at first thought Columbus was an ally of theirs who could be very helpful and useful to them. For years, they had Arab tribe. I keep getting the same call. I think it's a spam call. But anyways, I'm going to wrap up in a minute, guys. But basically, okay, I'm going to wrap up in a minute. I keep getting the same spam call. Basically, the Carib tribe. I'm so glad that I am safe and sound after everything that's happened. Okay. And is the internet working? Okay, I apologize for all the trouble. But basically, the sworn enemies of the tribe was the enemies of a Taíno tribe, and the Taíno tribe and they were the sworn enemies. And common was subjugation and enslavement. So the Taínos faced enslavement from the natives, but also from Columbus, but also faced enslavement from fellow natives, including the Carib tribe, who would not only enslave them but cannibalize them. It was because of the Carib tribe and their dominance over the Bahamas that Columbus named the region the Caribbean, but also the Spanish got the word cannibal from that. So the encounters with the Taíno tribe and the stories about the Caribs frightened Columbus and his men, and it helped reinforce this narrative of a savage. Either the savages were peaceful and easy to take advantage of, or they were warlike and needed to be conquered. So There were natives who worshipped a kind of an pantheistic spirit where they would worship all sorts of things, including rocks and things of that nature. But basically, the Native Americans would do it. There was different religions, and to say the Native Americans is narrowly reductive. Native Americans were of all different stripes and backgrounds and beliefs and practices, and they were very diverse. And the Native Americans of Northwest, like the Nez Perce, had nothing to do with the Carib tribe. And just because one native tribe was cannibalistic didn't mean another one was. And Columbus wasn't sure about the natives. He just thought these were the Indians that he had heard so much about from the Portuguese. Yeah, there were some who didn't have any religious beliefs, or very, very few, but there was always some sort of religious belief. I mean, the Aztecs were extraordinarily polytheistic, while the Plains Indians of the Sioux Nation, like the Cheyenne and the Lakota, believed in the Great Spirit and things like that. But Native Americans are as diverse in culture, religion, and language as the Europeans. So, and as such was the case with Caribbean natives and South American natives, who are entirely North American natives. I'm not even speaking to North American. I mean, this is not even speaking intercontinentally between native groups in the New World, Western Hemisphere. So Columbus eventually enslaved the Taíno at the behest of the Spanish, who wanted to basically take advantage of the resources and civilize them. They believed they could educate them and bring them into Christianity. The church hesitated about allowing this, but did want to save the souls, supposedly, of the natives, and so went along with it, as would be the case in skyrocketing fashion, not just for the Taíno tribe, but for a bunch of different tribes. When people throw the Native Americans and lump them all together in one way, it's because they are looking at the experience of the natives through the lens of the Europeans, who enslaved them, exposed them to diseases they could not defend themselves from, and so died off, just like the Taíno tribe. And because those experiences are the same across the book, regardless whether it was the Spanish, Portuguese, or English, or French, usually, they look at the Native Americans and say they must be the same, but just the experience being the same in their encounters with the Europeans doesn't make the Native Americans and the indigenous peoples all the same. So that's a basic moral lesson that we can get from the story of Columbus and Taíno tribe. The enslavement and subjugation of these people led to, and the exposure to disease led to them dying off at very vast rates. I love having you here, Melody, thank you. Led to vast death, and exposure to disease killed off natives at a greater rate than anything else. So I wanted to talk about the Taíno tribe, and I wanted to talk about Christianity. I think I got there, so we're going to wrap up a few minutes early. Usually we go overtime, but thank you everyone for joining us. I know we were a little late. I know everything's been really spotty. We're in the process. We're in transition. It's ebb and flow right now. If you enjoyed what you learned about, if you enjoyed learning about this history, about the natives, and also about the early Christian church, consider liking and subscribing, following the social media and all of that. And we will be back on Friday and next Saturday for our live stream Q&A. And next week, we'll be talking about the English Civil War and having a special Monday live stream lecture about Martin Luther King, his legacy and life. So please join us for that. Really looking forward to that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I will see you guys later on. Take care and have a great Sunday. Bye-bye now.